Welcome back. I'm Patti Gribow. It was said that President Reagan, actually Ronald Reagan, when he was governor of California, was too old and too conservative to be president. Margaret Thatcher was too conservative, and a woman, oh my goodness, to have a woman as prime minister, forget about it. And it was absurd, absolutely absurd, to think about having a Polish pope. Well, our next guest has written a book that shows you that history has certainly proved that this wasn't true about three greats. He's written about the president, the pope, and the prime minister, an author who worked with Margaret Thatcher, a special advisor, covered the Reagan presidency, and also has written several articles on Pope John Paul. Will you please welcome with me, Mr. John O'Sullivan. Hey, what an honor.
Thank you very much.
Hi. Please sit down.
Thank you.
Quite an honor for us to have you here.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here, and thanks very much indeed for inviting me.
And you said this is the first time you've been to our Coachella Valley.
It is indeed, and I'm astonished at how beautiful it is.
That's great. That's great. Well, we certainly love it here as well. Now, this week you're here, and next week you're going into Los Angeles to do the Bill Maher show, correct?
Yes, I'm going on this Friday, and then I go up to do some appearances on the book, talk about the book in San Francisco, and then we launch the book next week in Canada.
How fabulous. For those of you who have not read it, I must tell you, get a pencil out, get a pen, write down the title of this book, or you'll be able to Google us, Google John O'Sullivan. This book, The President, the Pope, and the Prime Minister, is a very inspirational book. For our times, for what is going on with books such as The Secret coming out, and this is not comparing this to The Secret, obviously, but the idea of the spirituality that the three, President Reagan, the Pope, and Margaret Thatcher shared is absolutely exceptional. You've had the honor of interviewing so many different people throughout your career. Are there any specific interviews that pop into your mind as the most intriguing?
Well, the interviews I've had have been very interesting, and they've been with European leaders and people like Edward Heath and Willy Brandt. I used to be in television myself before I became a print journalist back in the 70s. But I have to say that, of course, none of them amount to meeting Reagan and working for Mrs. Thatcher. I never officially interviewed Ronald Reagan. I met him on 4 or 5 occasions, one of which was a dinner. But he was an extremely interesting man, very unlike the caricature that people painted him at the time. Obviously relaxed, obviously engaging, amusing, with a fond of Hollywood stories. But, you know, he used those Hollywood stories very effectively. If he wanted to deflect anger, if he wanted to change the subject, he would tell one of these anecdotes. And the person would be so charmed that they would forget what they would be trying to say to him. And Mrs. Thatcher is very different, of course, but of course impressive in her own way.
Now, in writing about President Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and also the Pope, the three of them were a dynamic team, as it was to change the face of our world. Was one of them more powerful than the other, in the sense, or the leader of the? I hate to say the leader of the pack, but the leader of the three.
Well, of course, Ronald Reagan was. The way I would put it is to say Ronald Reagan was a pivotal figure. He had a very close relationship with Margaret Thatcher, which, of course, I think everyone knows. They saw eye to eye, they liked each other, and they gave each other important political backing when either one was in trouble. Reagan was also very close to the Pope. Now, he met the Pope only about 7 times, but they established, particularly in the very first meeting in Rome in 1982, a rapport, and Reagan convinced the Pope that he, Ronald Reagan, was a man genuinely devoted to peace who wanted to rid the world of nuclear weapons. That's something we later came to realize about Reagan. No one thought so at the time, but he persuaded the Pope of this, and that established a warm relationship. The relationship between Mrs. Thatcher and the Pope, that wasn't so close. So it's Reagan who's the pivotal figure, who brings all three together.
I thought it was interesting in your book, in reading the one line on the closeness of Reagan and John Paul, in the sense that they were both shot within 43 days of one another. And I loved the statement that was said that it was one hand that fired the gun and another hand that guided the bullet.
Well, I think it sends a shiver up and down your spine when you think about the following facts. The three of them come to power within a matter of 2 years of each other. 3 months after Reagan becomes president, there's an attempt on his life.
Right.
It almost succeeds. 1 month later, there's an attempt on the Pope's life. It almost succeeds. Right. 2 years later, there's an attempt on Margaret Thatcher's life. It almost succeeds. They go on to achieve enormous things. And I think the two men certainly believed that God had intervened to spur
Right.
them for some great purpose. And you quoted the line that the Pope had
Right.
used. Yeah.
Right, and it is amazing. And after President Reagan came out of his surgery, when he left, not after his surgery, but when he went back to the White House, didn't he, I don't remember who he did say it to, you did say it in your book, that he said that he had a greater mission now
Yes,
to
that's
accomplish.
right. Well, he said that to the cardinal from Rome. I forget the cardinal's name. But you know, there's a story about Reagan which in a sense is even more impressive and harks back to what you said about spirituality. Reagan, when he's on the operating table, the nurse is cutting away the clothes, and she sees that he's been shot, and she says, "Oh my goodness, the president's been shot." At that point, the doctors didn't realize what had happened. And Reagan awoke at that very moment, and he heard those words, and as he heard them, into his mind came the image of a young man crouching with a gun, which he recalled from hours before. At that moment, understandably, anger welled up in the president's mind. But he said to himself, if I'm to ask God for forgiveness, I have got to forgive that young man. And he made a conscious effort to do so, and he did so, and then he lost consciousness again. Now, it's well known, I think, that the Pope is a mystic, but I think there's a large element of the mystic in Reagan as well.
Oh, I do too. I do too. I had the good fortune of performing for his second inauguration, and with Frank Sinatra produced the event. And I remember we were all up on stage, all the entertainers at the end of the at the end of the show with Ray Charles playing "God Bless America," and President Reagan got up and walked towards the stage. And I remember telling my mom and my husband and my dad at that time, I swear you could feel a force, you could feel an energy coming towards you. He had that kind of aura. I really felt as if he did anyway.
He had that kind of aura, but also, if you had come to him with a problem, he would have set about trying to solve it. We now know that he answered an enormous number of letters from ordinary members of the public, and he took care with his answers. In one case, he wrote to the parents of a boy who had written to him, really? Bringing some problem, and he wrote to the parents explaining what advice he'd given the boy and telling them about it. Now, this is the leader of the free world who's got enormous world problems on his plate, but he takes time out to do this kind of thing. I mean, this is really remarkable. I should add, by the way, that Mrs. Thatcher, during the Falklands War, wrote personally to the families of all the British soldiers who perished in it.
She really proved her stuff during the Falkland War as well.
She certainly did. When the war, I mean, in a sense, Mrs. Thatcher was elected with a program of national recovery. She wanted to restore Britain from the terrible straits it had fallen into to being a great country once again. And when the Falklands were seized, this was a test she couldn't duck. She had to meet it. It was a test that wasn't easy to win. The British had to send an armada 8,000 miles from home to fight an enemy that was 400 miles from home. But she carried that off. She gave backing to the soldiers and sailors. She carried out very clever diplomatic maneuvers, and she won. And that established her both as a national, a national leader who at that point was unassailable for 4 or 5 years, and also as a world figure. And by the way, among other people, it impressed the Soviets as well.
And why was she called the Iron Lady?
Oh, that's a name that was given to her by the Soviets. She made a speech when she was leader of the opposition saying that we had to stand up to the Soviet Union and we had to defend ourselves against the Warsaw Pact. And there was an editorial in Red Star, the official journal of the Red Army, attacking her as the Iron Lady. Well, she embraced the name. And in the Falklands War, a famous member of Parliament stood up and said at the beginning, we shall know in the next few months of what metal the lady is really made.
I love it.
Then when she won, he stood up and said, I have a report from the chief metallurgist.
That's great.
And he said, this is a material that may be used for all national purposes.
For Britain, that's wonderful. When we come back, you're going to hear more from John O'Sullivan. Stay tuned. This is really nice.